The majority of patients on Unit 8 weren't ambivalent about living or dying, and the ones that were knew better than to admit it. But for one reason or another, they chose to hurt themselves. And because accidents happen, every patient on the unit was considered ambivalent, and items like a paperclip were seen as weapons of self-destruction. Now it's time for Puppets, Pupils, and Producers, a story of mind over matter. When Cassie started working at the facility, Unit 8 was known as Ollie's. However, unlike other units, the nickname of Unit 8 changed if a patient took his own life, which served to remind the staff to never say never, especially when it came to assessing a patient's level of risk for self-harm. By then, Cassie had responded to several medical emergencies involving attempts, but there hadn't been an intentional death on the MAD side in almost 8 years. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said about the bad side, where there was an average of 3 per year. While 3 per year was very concerning, it was still much better than having 1 per month, which was the average on the psych ward in the general hospital during Cassie's training. The first patient was given a pass for 1 hour. As soon as he left the unit, he jumped out of a 3rd-story window. The second man was given a day pass. As soon as he got to his parents' house, he swallowed a concoction of pills he'd hidden weeks earlier and died in the CCU days later. The third failed to return from a weekend pass and was found hanging in a tree by the police. Since Cassie was present when the team leader assessed all 3 of the men and had agreed with her decisions every time, she'd revisit their conversations trying to figure out what they'd missed, and realized she'd assumed that the improvement in their mood and vitality was due to the antidepressant medication having a positive effect. What she didn't consider was that they were feeling better because the pill had cured their ambivalence. Except they'd made the other decision and finally had the energy to take action. To help them understand their condition, she'd talk about the neurotransmitter serotonin and how in their brain it was responsible for regulating their sleep, hunger, memory, learning, and their mood, which was the reason why, when it was low, a person would feel irritable and may experience changes in their sleep, appetite, concentration, and their memory. She'd also tell them that in their body, serotonin was considered a hormone, and that 90% of it was made and stored in their gut, where it was responsible for regulating their cardiovascular function, bowel motility, bladder control, and ejaculatory latency, which was the measurement of how long a man could last during intercourse. Then she'd touch on the long list of side effects that would affect the same organs and systems she'd just listed, and she'd suggest if they found the side effects too bothersome after a month or so, there were other pills that would help, and if they didn't work, they could try a different SSRI. Then she'd explain that most likely their dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter associated with motivation, was low as well, hence the reason why they'd lost interest in pursuing their goals. Then she'd explain how too much dopamine might cause someone to be impulsive and was associated with addictive behaviors such as binge eating, gambling, and alcoholism. She'd use the analogy that if their brain wasn't an amusement park, dopamine would be the exciting roller coaster, whereas serotonin was similar to the relaxing swans. she'd add how too much serotonin wasn't good either. And she'd teach them about serotonin syndrome, which was life-threatening and most often caused by taking pills or supplements that increased it versus having an actual medical condition. She'd tell them that the symptoms would most likely come on quickly, and if they experienced tremors or a racing heart, hypertension, hyperthermia, hyperreflexes, confusion, or extreme agitation, they needed to let the staff know right away. She also told them if they stopped taking the SSRI suddenly, they would likely experience withdrawal symptoms, which may or may not include electric shock-like sensations referred to as brain zaps. Then, because she'd already seen it 3 times with her own eyes, she'd warn that sometimes the SSRIs had the opposite effect, and if they started thinking about the other decision, they needed to let the staff know that too, so they could support them through it. What she'd purposely omit from their conversations was how their blood might not clot as well, just in case they'd exploit it. What she didn't know, and therefore couldn't teach her patients, was that along with the possibility of making their ideation worse, they may become violent or even manic, which could have explained why so many patients in the general hospital had no history of mania, but were presenting as bipolar. And because she didn't know, she couldn't tell them that the chemical imbalance theory was created by the pharmaceutical companies, and in the years to come, their marketing would convince 10% of the population that their turmoil was inherited and their pill was the solution to their problems. Because she believed the theory, she couldn't tell them that the only thing the pill was doing was blunting their messy emotions, and unless they dealt with the root cause, nothing would change. Nor could she tell them that eating foods high in tryptophan, which was the precursor to serotonin, and going for a walk in the sunshine was the best medicine. So couldn't tell them that after a while the effects would diminish, and once they were at the highest dosage, they might need another pill. Worst of all, she couldn't warn them that the pills were actually changing their brain, and if they were lucky, their uncomfortable withdrawal would only take months. If they weren't so lucky, they might incur permanent brain damage and may experience severe withdrawal symptoms for several years. During her training, she also worked with patients who said they were ambivalent or acted as if they were when they weren't. One such patient was diagnosed with Munchausen's, which is a syndrome involving intentionally harming oneself or pretending to harm oneself for attention. Because this lady only pretended to take a bottle of pills before calling the ambulance, she wasn't actually ambivalent, but rather extremely lonely. Another patient was an overwhelmed medical student who injected himself with a slurry of his own feces, so he'd get sick and would have an excuse to quit school. And while his actions could be life-threatening, his self-harm was a means to an end, so it was viewed as a manipulative cry for help. A third patient had borderline personality disorder, which, according to the nurses, carried the highest risk of accidentally ending their life because their motivation changed. Sometimes they self-harmed to punish themselves, and they did it in secret. Other times, they did it openly because they wanted attention. Sometimes they did it because they felt numb or because they were trying to shift their pain from the inside to the outside. Other times, They did it because they wanted to inflict pain on others. The majority of patients on Unit 8 weren't ambivalent about living or dying, and the ones that were knew better than to admit it. But for one reason or another, they chose to hurt themselves. And because accidents happen, every patient on the unit was considered ambivalent, and items like a paperclip were seen as weapons of self-destruction. To prevent the hiding and hoarding of items, the patients were either locked in or locked out of their cells. To prevent hanging, they had to remove their clothing before going into their cells. Keeping the cell doors closed also helped manage the patient who would eat toilet paper by the roll, because he had pica, which is an eating disorder involving the consumption of non-food items. Other patients chose water as their weapon of self-destruction and would drink to the point of intoxication. Known as PPD, or psychogenic polydipsia, it occurred in approximately 20% of psychiatric patients, and although the cause was unknown, long-term use of antipsychotic medications was the most likely suspect. To keep the drinkers alive, they were weighed every hour, and if they didn't gain more than 2 kilograms, which equaled 2 liters of fluid, they were rewarded with a cup of water. However, if they happened upon an unsupervised drink, tap, or even toilet, they'd drink the water until it was gone, until they were caught, or until it all came back out via projectile vomiting. If they could, those patients could drink 10 to 15 liters in an hour, which would dilute their sodium to dangerously low levels and put them at risk for heart problems, a seizure, and even death. The last group came to the facility after their attempt made them more violent. One man survived his gunshot and was missing a part of his skull and brain. Another survived the anoxia of his carbon monoxide poisoning. A third survived his jump from an overpass, but shattered the bones in his pelvis and legs. A dozen orthopedic surgeries followed, and because his legs were bowed and his arms swung oddly when he walked, he was nicknamed Clyde, which he thought was very funny. What wasn't funny was the SSRI-induced mania and debilitating akathisia that instigated his final jump and led to Unit 8's name changing from Ollie's to Clyde's. Hola, hola, pupils! If you're enjoying my fictional self-healing series, I'd love your feedback. I'd also love it if you'd feed the algorithm by following me and liking the post. And if you're stuck in the mindset and frequency of a puppet, and you'd like an energy session with me, please reach out and we'll make it happen.